Hello, this is Michael Arney with Leonardo Academy. Thank you all for attending. This is a session on the National Sustainable Agriculture Standard, LEO 4000, and this presentation is an overview of Section 4. Okay, we're ready to proceed. Thanks again for attending. I'm going to do the introduction and lead the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Grace Gershuni, Principal at GIA Services, who's been a member of the Standards Committee from the very beginning of the development process and who's Secretary of the Standards Committee and is co-chair of the Environmental Subcommittee, will be doing the part of the presentation on the environmental component of the standard. So here's an overview of the presentation. There's the introduction, and then there'll be a description of the environmental section of the standard, dealing with the objectives, the impact areas, the criteria, and the indicators. And then we'll have a question and answer session. So Leonardo Academy is a 501c3 nonprofit, a charitable nonprofit. We were founded in 1997, and really our goal is to empower the competitive market to advance sustainability. And to do this, we work on developing new sustainability strategies and standards that help, and then we help participants and clients use these strategies to win in the environmental competitive world. So the standard development process that we use is the ANSI, American National Standard Institute process. Our participants include the Standard Committee. We have a variety of membership categories: producers, users, environmental, academic, and government, and other. There are also observers in the process. These are non-voting participants. And then commenters in the public comment process that's currently happening. This is the first national sustainable agriculture standard to be developed in the United States. What's our strategy for the standard? To create a clear and comprehensive standard for sustainable agriculture that provides guidance for producers, metrics for measuring levels of achievement, third-party verification, simplified sustainability reporting, clear communications up and down the supply chain from producers to consumers, and then branding of consumer from the consumer to the producer level. What are the objectives? It's to empower the marketplace to transform agriculture towards sustainability. It does this by empowering producers and empowering buyers at various levels of the supply chain so they can drive increased sustainability in agriculture with their actions and choices. What's the scope of LEO 4000? Right now, it's plants, both on the food side and the other products like fiber side. And in the future, we'll develop a component of the standard that addresses animal production as well. So what's our measurement strategy in the standard? It's to use performance-based metrics wherever practical. This is in preference to practice-based metrics. What's the structure of LEO 4000? There are 4 categories of achievement. There's a general area, environmental area, social area, and economic area. And today, as I said, we're talking about the environmental area. In each category, there are objectives, that's the impact area, criteria for affecting that impact area, and then indicators that measure the level of impact. 4 levels of performance under the standard: bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. To earn each of these performance levels, the producer must meet all the required indicators. These are essentially prerequisites. And then to meet the requirement of earning or meeting the requirements of a specified number of optional indicators. And one of the important parts of implementing sustainability and implementing Leo 4000 is the producer sustainability plan. And Grace would like to talk about this. Are you there, Grace? Just making sure I have Grace.
Making sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Grace.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to focus on the producer sustainability plan a bit, because each one of the areas, the categories that Mike talked about, refers back to information that's provided in the producer sustainability plan. Most of the environmental criteria involve reference to a baseline, which means that there is a level of, say, soil organic matter or water quality that has been documented in the producer sustainability plan that is going to be improved, or that might be improved in the course of the environmental criteria. So I just wanted to call your attention to that as the context for some of the criteria that are, and indicators that are identified in the slides to come. We can go on. Okay, let's move ahead.
Oh, please proceed, Grace.
Yeah, I'm not controlling this, am I?
No, just tell me when you'd like a new slide. I'm sorry.
Let's move ahead. Okay, these are the 7 objectives that were culled from the environmental list that we came up with, that were all derived from various principles that we worked on for quite a while together. And these are the ones that that sorted themselves out. Production systems, soil resources, water resources, air resources, biotic resources, energy resources and use, and waste management. Next slide, please. So as we organized it in the environmental category, each objective starts out with a description of the resource, and that includes the baseline that is documented in the producer sustainability plan. And then the next criteria describe positive and negative aspects of the resource. And then within the criterion, it's a similar set of indicators that measure the descriptive aspect of the soil or water or energy, indicators that we want to be moving in a positive direction, like nutrient availability, and those that we want to be moving in a negative direction, like any kind of degradation that might be occurring. And the final group are indicators that are optional, that would indicate, that would be part of the achievement of a higher level, or that would be required in a certain percentage level in order to meet the gold, silver, bronze, or platinum goals that you might have. Next slide, please. The first objective talks about the production system, so it looks at the whole arrangement of what you're producing, and it's objective is to select crops and production systems that support soil and plant health, minimize pest pressures, and sustain crop productivity and quality. Next slide. So within the production system, there are several criteria. The first one is the basic description of of the production system, and then there are a number of indicators underneath that criterion, and we'll illustrate what this looks like in an entire objective when we get to the water resources piece. Next slide. The next aspect of the production system is crop diversity and quality. And that means that the producer develops and implements a crop diversity and quality plan that's consistent with the objective. And that has quite a few more indicators that have to do with how one measures, monitors crop diversity, what other monitoring of crop quality is done, and so forth. Next slide. Third aspect of the production system is pest population and control. And here the producer develops and implements a pest population and control plan that's consistent with the objective. Again, it has a dozen indicators. Some of them are optional for all levels, and some of them are required for all levels. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to water. Next slide. Soil resources. This means that the producer conserves soil and maintains or improves soil quality. I don't think anybody can disagree that this is an essential cornerstone of any sustainability plan. Next slide. So the first thing is the description of the soil resources, including any sources of risk to the resource, sloping ground or wind, or possibly some form of contamination. So we can move on. Next slide. So soil erosion is one of those things that we want to mitigate or have diminished. And so the criterion involves preventing soil loss. And there are a number of indicators that have to do with how one monitors soil loss and how one prevents soil loss. Next slide. Soil structure and tilth. This really has to do not so much with the texture of the soil that is represented in that graphic, but with the aggregation of the soil that includes things like compaction and aeration and bulk density. And these are all things that that we would like to see improved and monitored in the sustainability plan. Next slide. Soil organic matter, the fourth criterion. So it starts out with the description. The producer maintains soil organic matter content in the rooting zone. There are a number of criteria that include a description, that include monitoring and increasing levels of soil organic content, that involve using methods that will increase soil content, keeping the soil covered, to increasing extents and so forth. Next criterion, or next criterion, next slide. Soil biological activity, and that involves the number and types of or evidence of micro and macroorganisms or their activity. So this involves various means of monitoring for soil biological activity. As we know, this is important to soil health and the availability of nutrients and so forth. Next slide. Soil degradation other than from erosion, meaning qualities that we wish to minimize. The producer minimizes the degradation of soil quality from accumulation of fertilizers, salts, heavy metals, and agrochemicals. There are a number of indicators depending on which of these things you need to monitor for. This would be identified as one of the risks in the first criterion, where you're determining what risks exist to your soil resource. So, for example, if you have had some issues with heavy metal contamination in the past, that would be one of the risks that you would be monitoring. Next slide. Soil nutrients. The producer manages soil nutrients to produce healthy plants without causing environmental harm. So the slides, the graphics show pretty much one form of soil nutrients. As we know, there are many possible ways of providing soil nutrients, and everybody is familiar with soil nutrient planning from various NRCS requirements, and this essentially will involve doing similar kinds of soil nutrient management. Next slide. Now we get to water resources. The producer, the overall objective is the producer preserves water quality and prevents water resource depletion. And there are, I'm not sure how many criteria there are here. We'll get to all of them, I believe, and look at them in more depth so that you get a better sense of how this system of indicators that are required or optional for various levels works. Next slide. The first criterion is about water resources and the description. The producer describes the water resources used in the operation, the risks to these resources, and other resource concerns. So if there are issues about contamination by livestock waste, or if there are issues, if the operation uses irrigation, those are all things that could potentially be risks. Next slide. So here is the full set of indicators for this criterion. And as you see, the objective is at the top. The description is there, and the description of the criterion is there, and there are 4 indicators. So the first one is a description of all of the water-related resources and legal issues, and that's required for all levels. And the description of current known or potential threats to water availability are all required. And then the producer sustainability plan describes the known threats. That's all required. And the producer sustainability plan describes goals and strategies for decreasing water usage, treating water, and maintaining water quality, and how those goals will be achieved. So all of that is required of everybody under this standard. That's the basic planning requirement. Next slide, please. So water quality protection means the producer preserves water quality and prevents water resource depletion. And there are only two indicators, so we can look at them on the next slide. So the producer demonstrates that input and waste storage and disposal do not pollute water bodies. That's required of everybody. And the nutrient budget and monitoring to ensure that water quality is met is optional at the bronze level, and that means that essentially in order to progress to another level, to a higher level from the bronze level, you need to both do nutrient budgeting and monitoring of your water quality. Next slide. Water quantity protection. Producer maximizes efficiency in irrigation systems and reduces water use where possible. There are 8 indicators for this criterion, and we can look at them on the next slide, please. One thing I want to point out is that in cases where you don't do irrigation, where in dryland farming or other situations where it's not necessary to irrigate, this would not be applicable and it would not be counted in meeting requirements for this standard. So these are all about maintaining your water supply, avoiding depletion of the water supply. And you can see that there are optional, these are all optional at the bronze level. So at the bronze level, you can come in and not have a particular plan for reducing water use, but once you graduate to the silver level, and you can only stay at the bronze level for, I think it's either 2 or 3 years before you have to move up. You have to start doing some of these things, and the required ones at the silver level have to do with establishing procedures to quantify and assess how much water you're using, and that the next requirement is that the assessment has been completed. And the higher levels, the gold and platinum, require that you implement a strategy to maximize efficiency, that you reuse treated wastewater where possible, and that you adopt water conserving crops or crop varieties. And then there's a number of optional at all levels, and that means that you can pick and choose from these to meet your requirements for the number of optional levels that you satisfy. And you'll note the last two are referred back to the baseline usage. So when you set up your baseline usage of how much water you're actually using per year, and you monitor how much you are actually using, you've implemented strategies to reduce water use, you can either qualify for a 20% reduction or 50% reduction. Of course, if you do 50%, you've met both of those. Next slide, please. Air resources. The producer protects air quality and prevents air resource degradation. And the illustrations show a good range of different ways that air quality can be degraded. Next slide. So the first criterion is description of the resource. I think that essentially what this requires is that that you describe any possible threats to air resource, such as burning or aerial spraying of agrochemicals. Next slide. Okay. This has to do with, this criterion is about reducing criteria pollutants and hazardous air pollutants, and these all have a legal definition, and I think that that would be pretty clearly self-explanatory why that's an important criterion. Next slide, please. This has to do with reduction of ozone-depleting substances in particular, and this is something that, again, many environmental plans are going to be looking at. Next slide. And the reduction of greenhouse gases and other climate forcers. So the steps that are being taken to reduce greenhouse gases and other climate forcers is another important one. There are a number of steps that can be taken. It's not that easy to monitor, but you can use practices that are known to reduce the off-gassing of nitrous oxide, for example, or methane. Next slide, please. This is the fifth objective, biotic resources, and that really has to do with biodiversity. The producer maintains or enhances species health and diversity and supports habitats within the agroecosystem. Next slide. So, first criterion is a description of the quality, composition of the habitats and the associated species that are affected by or within the boundaries of the operation. Now, it's not necessary to do a complete wildlife inventory or anything like that, but very often there are maps and listings available that would give you an idea of what wild species and what potentially endangered species or species of concern are native to your particular operation. Next slide, please. So, if there are any species of concern or areas of high ecological significance that you've described in the previous criterion, you in this criterion you then identify a plan to preserve or protect those species, and those areas that are designated as areas of high ecological significance. And again, this all has legal and regulatory definitions, so it would mean areas that meet those definitions. Next slide, please. The next one is the things that we want to discourage, and that's invasive species. So in this case, in the description, the producer maps the presence, abundance, and distribution of invasive species and controls and mitigates the conditions that support those species. And there are various ways of doing this, and the general objective is to monitor and demonstrate that they are being at least controlled, if not reduced, through your efforts. Next slide, please. The sixth objective is taking steps to minimize net energy consumption. So that's both reducing consumption and, in some cases, when it's possible, to actually produce energy on the farm. Next slide. So we start out with the first criterion is describing the energy produced and used in the farming operation. What concerns exist about the energy resource, and what goals and strategies you have for improving energy efficiency and reducing use of non-renewable energy. Next slide, please. So the criterion is minimizing energy consumption, and the indicators have to do with different strategies for identifying how much energy is consumed and reducing it, and I believe that they are based on proportional things, so that if you cut your farm in half, you're not necessarily cutting your energy use in half. Next slide, please. Energy produced and exported. So in this case, the producer tracks renewable and non-renewable energy produced on-site and exported. I believe these are all optional, so that if you're producing energy and exporting it, you will be able to count that towards some of your optional requirements. Next slide, please. Final objective has to do with waste management, and the producer manages waste to minimize environmental harm. And I would want to add to that and optimize nutrient cycling, but we've already addressed that earlier. Next slide, please. So first off is a description of the waste streams, both organic and inorganic, from the operation, along with what their concerns are, what the opportunities are, and how you are monitoring that waste stream. Next slide. Organic waste materials and crop residues. So this is an important one for a sustainable operation in closing the loop on nutrients instead of having them be a linear flow from input to landfill. And there are a number of indicators for this, and I am not sure what they all are, but I think that many of them are optional, but required for the higher levels. Next slide, please. Inorganic waste can be a problem, and the producer has to provide evidence that those wastes are reused, recycled, or repurposed to minimize the volume of wastes that must be disposed of. And here you see a very good illustration of a form of inorganic waste that can be a problem. And the indicators have to do with the different kinds of waste and what efforts are made to reduce the use of inputs that create that kind of waste. Next slide, please. Agrochemicals and other hazardous materials. This is an important one, and which is subject to a great deal of regulatory oversight, and the indicators for this are what you're doing that goes beyond merely complying with regulations for hazardous waste management. Next slide, please. That's it. I guess we've covered all of the objectives and criteria in the environmental section, and I'll turn it back over to Mike to conclude, and we can take some questions.
Okay, thank you, Grace. We'd like to remind everyone that we still have several presentations in this series coming up. Next week on Tuesday, we will be covering the social section of the standard. The following week, February 25th, we'll be covering the economic section of the standard. And then on Tuesday, March 4th, we'll repeat the introduction to the draft standard for anyone who missed that. So wanted to let everyone know about that. We will be posting recordings of each session and the PowerPoints of each section on the Leonardo Academy website, and we'll try to get that done by the end of this week. We'd like to remind everyone that the public comment period is in progress, and that if you'd like to make public comments, you should download a draft. The address for that is here, and you should request from Leonardo Academy the public comment form for making your public comments. So there are a variety of ways you can help support the development and implementation of the standard. Number one is providing comments on the draft standard. Number two is signing up to participate in the pilot to test out the draft standard. And then third is to sign up and participate in the standard development process. The good thing about standards is that the work is never done. Once the standard's approved, we'll continue on with a continuous maintenance of the standard, so there'll be continue to be work for both the standard committee and subcommittees to do. And then if you'd like to make a charitable donation to support the development, pilot testing, and ongoing maintenance of the standard, this is always welcome. Leonardo Academy is a charitable nonprofit. If you have any questions, you can contact me, Michael Arney, President of Leonardo Academy. There's an email address and a web